Welcome. Tonight we explore the complete history of the Scottish clans, from the footprint carved into a stone at Dunad, where ancient kings married the land, to the frozen morning in 1692, when soldiers executed 38 of their own hosts. This is the story of bloodlines forged in rain and wind, revealing how human loyalty binds people to the rugged earth they inhabit. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. Now, settle into your space, soften your shoulders, and slow your breathing. Let us begin. In the year 500 AD, Gaelic-speaking settlers pull oak-timbered boats onto the rounded stones of the Argyll beaches on the western seaboard of modern Scotland. The men and women disembark from wooden galleys and skin-covered currachs. They construct these currachs by stretching tanned animal hides over flexible frameworks of woven hazel branches. They pull the hulls over the wet shingle, leaving drag marks in the grey gravel. These travellers arrive from the northern coast of Ireland, specifically the region of County Antrim, bringing domestic animals and bags of seed grain across the North Channel. They wear cloaks of woven wool, dyed with alder bark and birch leaves. The wind blowing across the Irish Sea pushes cold rain against their faces and wet clothing. Leading this migration is Fergus More, the son of Erc. He claims the western coastal territory and establishes the kingdom of Dalriata. The borders of this new kingdom stretch across the open water, encompassing the Scottish seaboard and the northeastern corner of Ireland. The settlers harvest timber from the surrounding oak and birch forests to construct rectangular timber halls. They stack unmortared stones to create circular defensive walls on the elevated coastal ridges. They clear the lowland soil using iron axes to plant oats and bare barley. They drive herds of small black cattle up into the highland pastures during the summer months to graze on the wild grasses. The Gaelic language spreads across the peninsulas and islands of Argyll as the settlers establish permanent farming communities. The people organize themselves into kin-based groups, structuring their society around direct bloodlines. They use the Gaelic word clan to describe their social units. The word clan translates directly into the English words children or kindred. The structure relies strictly on biological lineage traced through the male bloodline. Fergus More founds a specific royal lineage, asserting ownership over the soil of Argyll and the surrounding coastal islands. To the north and east of the new Dalriata settlements, a different population controls the land. The Picts occupy the central valleys and mountainous interior of the highlands, positioning their territory north of the River Forth and the River Clyde. The Picts inhabit the glens, stretching from the coastal plains of Fife to the northern shores of Caithness. The Pictish tribes carve symbols into standing slabs of sandstone. They use iron chisels to cut crescent shapes, double discs, and animal forms into the rock faces. They fight with square wooden shields and long spears, riding small ponies into battle across the highland heather. They construct massive dry stone towers, known as brocks, building double-walled, circular structures that stand over 40 feet tall. The Grampian Mountains form a physical barrier of granite and quartz between the Gaelic settlements of Dalriata on the western coast and the Pictish strongholds in the eastern river valleys. The Dalriata settlers consolidate their control over the western coast by expanding their agricultural production and marine harvesting. They use iron-tipped wooden plows pulled by oxen to turn the heavy coastal soil. They extract salt from the ocean water by boiling seawater in large clay vats over open peat fires. They preserve caught Atlantic salmon and herring by packing the fish in this harvested salt inside wooden barrels. The population relies on the sea for transportation, using single-masted wooden boats to navigate the narrow sea locks separating the mainland from the Hebridean Islands. The tidal currents rushing between the islands of Jura and Skaba create standing waves and whirlpools, forcing the sailors to time their crossings with the shifting phases of the moon and the changing of the tides. As the decades pass, the descendants of Fergus More divide the expanded territory of Dalriata among 4 specific kindreds. The Senel Gabrain takes control of the Kintyre Peninsula, a narrow strip of land pointing directly south toward the Irish coast. They build stone fortifications on the high rocky outcrops overlooking the sea lanes. The Senel Congail settles the lands of Cowal, bordering the deep-sea lochs of the Firth of Clyde. They harvest timber from the steep hillsides dropping directly into the saltwater basins. The Senel Loen claims the northern and central sections of Argyll, including the coastal areas surrounding the modern town of Oban. They construct defensive earthworks on the islands of the Firth of Lorn. The Senel Oengusa occupies the island of Islay, utilizing the flat, fertile land to cultivate larger yields of barley for brewing ale and baking flatbreads. These 4 kindreds govern their specific geographic territories, while maintaining an overarching allegiance to the high kingship of Dalriata. The local chieftains collect tributes of cattle, grain, and woven cloth from the tenant farmers working the land. They store the threshed grain in underground stone-lined pits to protect the harvest from the damp winter climate. Blacksmiths working in the coastal settlements forge iron swords and iron spearheads using locally mined bog iron ore. The metalworkers heat the ore in clay furnaces fueled by charcoal, using leather bellows to pump oxygen into the flames. They hammer the red-hot iron on stone anvils to shape the weapon blades. They equip the clan warriors with these iron weapons and circular wooden shields covered in stretched calfskin, securing the hides with bronze rivets. The rulers of the 4 kindreds require a central location to administer the growing kingdom and legitimize their authority over the land. They select an isolated rocky outcrop rising out of the flat expanse of the Crinan Moss. The local builders haul stones and timber up the steep slopes of this hill to construct a fortified capital. They name this hilltop stronghold Dunad. The site sits strategically above the meandering path of the River Ad, providing clear sightlines over the surrounding peat bogs and the western coastal approaches. The stone masons within the fortress carve a specific depression into a flat rock ledge positioned just below the upper defensive wall. The carving forms the exact shape of a human footprint, cut deep into the living stone, awaiting the bare foot of the next king. In the year 540 AD, local rulers gather on the terraced slopes of Dunad. Dunad stands 54 meters above the sea level of the surrounding Crinan Moss. The hill fort sits adjacent to the meandering path of the River Ad, near the modern village of Kilmartin in the region of Argyll. The men climb a steep, natural rock cleft to reach the upper enclosure of the fortification. A new king steps forward on a flat terrace of exposed schist rock. He removes his leather shoe and places his bare foot into a carved depression in the stone. The footprint measures 27 centimeters from heel to toe, matching the dimensions of an adult male foot. The king pours water from an adjacent rock-cut basin over his bare skin and into the carving during the ceremony. The chieftains stand on the dry stone ramparts and speak their oaths of loyalty in the Goidelic dialect. Beside the footprint, stone carvers use iron chisels to cut 2 other distinct marks into the exposed bedrock. They carve the outline of a wild boar standing on 4 legs. The boar features bristles along its back, rendered in the specific artistic style of the neighboring Pictish tribes. Next to the boar, the carvers cut a series of straight lines intersecting a central vertical stem. This creates an Ogham inscription, an early medieval alphabet used to write Irish and Pictish words. The intersecting lines measure exactly 10 centimeters long and cut 3 millimeters deep into the grey schist. The builders of Dunad construct the fortress using heavy blocks of local stone. They stack the flat slabs without wet mortar to form defensive perimeters on 4 distinct terraced levels. The lowest terrace functions as a primary entranceway, funneling arriving visitors through a narrow gap measuring 2 meters wide. Metalworkers occupy the middle terraces, lighting charcoal fires in small stone hearths to melt bronze and silver. The craftsmen use small clay crucibles to heat the metal to temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. They pour the liquid bronze into 2-piece clay molds to cast penannular brooches, decorative clothing pins, and sword pommels. The wind blowing off the River Ad carries the literal smell of wood smoke, burning peat, and heated metal across the hillside. The rulers of Dalriata use Dunad as a central hub for international maritime trade. Sailors navigate single-masted wooden galleys up the River Ad to deliver goods from the European continent. Merchants unload wheel-thrown ceramic vessels classified by modern archaeologists as Ewer pottery. These clay jars originate from the Loire Valley in Gaul, a region located in modern-day France. The jars contain imported wine, olive oil, and crushed plant dyes. The traders also transport chunks of orpiment, a yellow arsenic sulfide mineral extracted from volcanic regions on the continent. Monks living in nearby coastal monasteries crush the yellow orpiment on flat stones to create a fine powder. They mix the toxic yellow powder with egg yolks to paint illuminated capital letters onto calfskin vellum manuscripts. The authority of the king standing on the summit of Dunad extends far beyond the visible horizon of Argyll. The territory of Dalriata spans the western Scottish seaboard and crosses the open water to County Antrim in Northern Ireland. The distance between the Mull of Kintyre in Scotland and Tor Head in Ireland measures exactly 13 miles across the North Channel. The chieftains control this fractured maritime kingdom using a fleet of wooden galleys and skin-covered currachs. Boat builders construct the currachs by stretching oak-tanned cowhides over frames of woven hazel rods. They coat the stitched leather seams with heated pine pitch to waterproof the hulls. The oarsmen navigate the turbulent waters of the North Channel, rowing against tidal races that flow at speeds of up to 8 knots. The kingdom maintains a written census known as the Census Feran Alban, translating to the tradition of the men of Alba. This vellum document records the exact number of households located in each district of the kingdom. The census dictates the specific number of fighting men and oarsmen each settlement must provide to the king's fleet. The text requires every group of 20 households to provide 2 7-bench ships for maritime expeditions. This translates to 28 active oarsmen, drafted from every 20 homes. The warriors of Dalriata travel in these 14-oar vessels to enforce the collection of tribute across the coastal islands. They carry iron-tipped spears with ashwood shafts measuring 2 meters in length. The soldiers wear conical iron helmets and carry circular wooden shields covered in stretched leather. The kings at Dunad direct these naval forces north toward the Pictish settlements on the Isle of Skye and south toward the British kingdoms of Strathclyde along the River Clyde. As the population of Dalriata expands throughout the 6th and 7th centuries, the kingdom stretches across dozens of islands and deep-sea locks. The geographic separation, caused by heavy rainfall, steep mountain ridges, and fast-moving tidal currents forces the local populations to rely on regional leaders. The overarching royal bloodline, established by Fergus More, fractures into distinct branches based on regional territorial control. By the year 650 AD, these regional branches solidify into 4 distinct kindreds that govern through a strict division of land and political power. By the year 650 AD, the descendants of Fergus More govern the western seaboard through a strict division of land and manpower. The regional rulers partition the rocky coasts and deep-sea lochs into 4 primary territories. The Senel Nengabrain controls the southern peninsula of Kintyre. The leaders of this group trace their exact lineage to Gabron, a grandson of Fergus More. The Senel Comgaill occupies the land of Cowal, located directly east of Kintyre across the saltwater inlet of Loch Fyne. Their specific bloodline descends from Comgaill, the brother of Gabron. Further north, the Senel Loan settles the mainland coast and the adjacent islands of the Inner Hebrides. They claim direct descent from Loan, the brother of Fergus More. The modern district of Lorne, around the coastal town of Oban, retains the exact phonetic name of this 7th century kindred. The 4th group, the Senel Noengusa, populates the flat, fertile island of Islay. They trace their ancestry to Oengus, another brother of Fergus. These 4 kindreds function as distinct political entities, collecting their own grain taxes and maintaining their own fleets of wooden currachs. The tenant farmers living under the Senel Nengabrain cultivate fields of beria barley on the sandy Machrihanish dunes. They use curved iron sickles to cut the barley stalks during the late summer harvest. The men of the Senel Loan construct dry stone forts on steep volcanic plugs, stacking hexagonal basalt blocks to create defensible perimeters. On the island of Islay, the herdsmen of the Senel Noengusa drive short-horned cattle across the open peat bogs. The herdsmen brand the calves by pressing heated iron rods against the animal hides to mark ownership. Monks residing at the Iona monastery record the names of these 4 kindreds and their specific lineages. The Iona monastery sits on a small island composed of Lewisian gneiss rock off the western coast of the Isle of Mull. The stone walls of the monastic cells block the freezing winds blowing off the Atlantic Ocean. Inside the cells, the monks sit at sloping wooden desks and dip hollowed goose quills into ink made from crushed oak galls and iron soot. They write Goidelic names onto scraped calfskin vellum pages, documenting the births, deaths, and successions of the regional kings. The iron gall ink binds permanently to the collagen fibers in the vellum, preserving the precise genealogical links connecting the 4 kindreds. These written genealogies provide the legal foundation for specific men to collect tribute and draft oarsmen for the royal fleets. The political control over the Western Archipelago shifts continuously between the 4 kindreds throughout the 7th century. The Senel Nengabrain holds the high kingship for several decades, ruling from the terraced hill fort at Dunad. In the year 697 AD, a chieftain named Ferchar Fota disrupts this established succession. Ferchar Fota leads the warriors of the Senel Loan into direct physical conflict with the southern kindreds. His men row oak galleys down the Sound of Jura, carrying iron-tipped ash spears and round leather shields. Ferchar Fota secures the high kingship of Dalriata, physically moving the central political authority north into the district of Lorne. He exacts tribute in the form of silver bullion and live cattle from the defeated southern kindreds. The conquered chieftains deliver the cattle to the High King, driving the herds across the tidal shallows during low tide. the leaders of the Senil Loerne build a new stone fortification at Dun Olle to consolidate their territorial control. They choose a 90-foot-high, rocky promontory overlooking the sheltered waters of Oban Bay. The builders construct a thick stone rampart around the summit, incorporating a deep ditch cut directly into the bedrock to block landward access. From this elevated position, guards watch the sea channels for the squared linen sails of invading fleets. The wind sweeping across the promontory carries the smell of crushed kelp and drying fish from the shingle beaches below. While the four Gaelic kindreds fight for dominance over the western coast, a different political structure commands the lands to the east. The Grampian Mountains form a physical barrier of granite and quartz between the kingdom of Dalriata and the territories of the Picts. Snow covers the granite peaks of the Grampians for up to 5 months of the year, blocking the high passes with deep drifts. Water melting from these eastern slopes flows into the rivers Tay, Spey, and Dee. In the year 715 AD, King Nectan mac Derry surveys these eastern river valleys from his timber-laced stone hill forts. In the year 715 AD, King Nectan mac Derry rules the eastern and northern territories from a timber-laced stone hill fort named Craig Fadrig. Craig Fadrig sits exactly 142 meters above the tidal estuary of the Bowley Firth, near the modern city of Inverness. The Pictish builders construct the fort walls by laying parallel beams of oak timber horizontally and filling the gaps with crushed granite and earth. They set the timber on fire intentionally, creating temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius to melt the stone blocks into a solid mass of black glass. The vitrified walls measure 6 meters thick at the base. Inside the enclosure, metal workers cast bronze hanging bowls using 2-piece clay molds. From this elevated stronghold, King Nectan controls a vast kingdom divided strictly into 7 specific geographic provinces. The Picts call these 7 provinces Cait, Si, Sirin, Fib, Fidach, Fotla, and Fortriu. The province of Cait encompasses the extreme northern peninsula of modern Caithness, where the inhabitants cut blocks of old red sandstone to build circular coastal towers. The province of Fib covers the southern coastal peninsula, situated between the Firth of Tay and the Firth of Forth. The modern region of Fife retains this exact phonetic name. The province of Fortriu sits along the shores of the Moray Firth, where fishermen harvest Atlantic salmon from the River Spey using conical traps woven from flexible hazel rods. These 7 provincial boundaries establish the exact geographic borders for the medieval earldoms forming in Scotland 4 centuries later. The population living within these 7 provinces operates under a precise 3-tiered tribal structure. The base unit of this structure consists of the Tuath, a localized group of farmers and families occupying a specific river valley or coastal plain. Several Tuath combine to form a Morthuath or great tribe, led by a regional chieftain who collects taxes in the form of woven wool, live pigs, and harvested grain. 2 or more Morthuath combine to create a Coist, representing one of the 7 primary provinces under the direct command of the High King. The people occupying these eastern lands speak a specific language categorized by modern linguists as Brythonic. This Pictish tongue utilizes consonant shifts and vowel structures, aligning directly with the Welsh and Cornish languages spoken in southern Britain. The vocabulary and syntax of the Pictish language stem from a separate Celtic branch than the Goidelic Gaelic, spoken by the Dalriadan settlers on the western coast. The Pictish language uses the specific prefix pit to denote a parcel of land or a single farm. Modern maps of eastern Scotland display hundreds of towns beginning with this exact prefix, including the settlements of Pitlochry and Pittenweem. The Pictish scribes carved their Brythonic names into standing stones using the linear Ogham alphabet. They cut straight lines across vertical stems to spell out specific names like Talorcan, Droston, and Nectarn. The royal name Nectarn appears frequently in the Pictish king lists recorded by scribes on calfskin vellum. This specific name survives directly into later centuries through the lineage of Clan MacNaughton. The Gaelic prefix Mac translates to son of, making the surname MacNaughton translate exactly to the son of Nectarn. The descendants of this clan eventually build a stone stronghold named Freoch Eilean on an island in Lochor during the 13th century, carrying the linguistic remnants of the Pictish kings into the medieval era. In the early 8th century, the Pictish farmers living under King Nectarn cultivate crops of oats and beare barley in the eastern straths. They use iron shears to cut the wool from flocks of short-tailed sheep grazing on the heather-covered hillsides. Women sitting inside turf-roofed roundhouses spin this raw wool into yarn using stone spindle whorls and wooden drop spindles. They weave the yarn into heavy cloaks, using upright timber looms leaning against the dry stone walls of the houses. The smell of raw lanolin and wood smoke fills the low-ceilinged rooms as the weavers pass wooden shuttles back and forth through the vertical warp threads. Outside these domestic dwellings, stone carvers erect massive slabs of pink sandstone in the agricultural fields. They use iron hammers and iron chisels to cut geometric shapes 3 millimeters deep into the flat faces of the stone. They carve specific symbols, including intersecting V-rods, double discs, and crescent shapes. The Pictish infantry utilizes iron weapons to defend these agricultural territories from external threats. The soldiers carry ashwood spears with iron leaf-shaped blades measuring 20 centimeters long. They defend their bodies with square wooden shields constructed from planks of alder wood held together with iron nails. They ride small, muscular ponies measuring under 14 hands high into battle, carrying short iron swords with bone handles. In the year 729 AD, a massive battle occurs at Monithcarno between rival Pictish factions fighting for control of the High Kingship. Hundreds of men die from spear wounds and sword cuts in the wet mud of the Grampian foothills. The political instability created by these internal succession wars reduces the military strength of the eastern provinces. Simultaneously, the Gaelic kings on the western coast expand their territorial claims eastward along the river valleys, seizing agricultural land from the weakened Pictish chieftains. In the year 843 AD, a leader of Gaelic descent named Kenneth MacAlpin maneuvers his military forces to seize the Pictish throne. The distinct kingdoms of the Gaels and the Picts merge under his singular command to form the combined kingdom of Alba. At this exact time, shallow draft wooden longships carrying Norse warriors begin landing on the sandy beaches of the western and northern coasts. The arrival of these Scandinavian raiders, carrying iron broadswords and steel battle-axes, forces Kenneth MacAlpin to abandon the western coastal strongholds. He marches his royal household and his warriors eastward into the central river valleys, moving the political center of the new kingdom away from the ocean and deep into the mainland. In the year 843 AD, a Gaelic warlord named Kenneth MacAlpin unites the crowns of the Dalriadan Gaels and the Eastern Picts to form the single kingdom of Alba. Kenneth accomplishes this political consolidation after Norse raids decimate the Pictish nobility at a battle in the year 839 AD. He takes advantage of the political vacuum by placing Gaelic abbots into positions of power within the Pictish church. He orders his Gaelic scribes to write royal decrees on vellum using the Latin alphabet. Kenneth MacAlpin orchestrates this political union while Scandinavian longships arrive continuously on the western coastline of Argyll. These Norse raiders sail shallow draft wooden ships measuring 20 meters long directly onto the shingle beaches. The raiders disembark carrying iron battle axes and steel-edged broadswords to attack the coastal settlements. The constant maritime attacks force Kenneth MacAlpin to abandon the western coastal capital of Dunad. He orders his royal household to pack their metalworking tools, woven textiles, and silver bullion into ox-drawn wooden carts. The royal retinue marches eastward, away from the Atlantic Ocean, migrating 50 miles inland toward the protected river valleys of Perthshire. During this eastern migration, the Gaelic monks and retainers transport a block of coarse-grained red sandstone known as the Stone of Destiny. The rectangular stone measures 26 inches long, 16 inches wide, and 10 inches deep. It bears a single Latin cross carved into the flat upper surface. The monks carry this block of sandstone, weighing 152 kilograms, over the mountain passes using wooden sledges. They deliver the stone to a religious settlement at Scone, situated on the eastern bank of the River Tay. At Scone, workers construct an artificial earthen mound called the Moot Hill, using soil carried in leather boots from different regions of the kingdom. Kenneth MacAlpin sits on the red sandstone block atop this earthen mound to receive the combined crown of Alba. From this eastern location, Kenneth dictates laws in the Goidelic language, slowly replacing the Brythonic tongue of the Picts across the eastern provinces. The Norse incursions displace thousands of Gaelic tenant farmers and regional chieftains from the western archipelago. These displaced kindreds walk eastward into the central highlands, seeking refuge in the steep glens of the Grampian Mountains. They clear plots of land adjacent to the River Spey and the River Dee, using iron axes to cut down native Scots pine trees. The men construct timber longhouses insulated with packed earth and roofed with dried heather collected from the surrounding hillsides. They burn blocks of cut peat in central stone hearths to heat the interior rooms. The women spin wool from mountain sheep into thick yarn, weaving heavy cloaks to block the winter snowfalls, dropping temperatures below freezing. These isolated mountain communities form new tribal alliances based on their shared Gaelic ancestry. They rely on herds of short-horned black cattle for milk, meat, and leather, driving the animals into hidden mountain corries to protect them from rival rustlers. 7 distinct kindreds form a specific confederation known as the Seol Alpin, translating from Gaelic as the Seed of Alpin. These 7 clans claim direct biological descent from Kenneth MacAlpin's father, King Alpin mac Ecdarch. Clan Gregor emerges as a primary branch of this confederation, occupying the mountainous terrain around Glen Orchy and Glen Stray. The MacGregors adopt a pine branch as their physical plant badge, pinning the green needles to their woven wool bonnets. Clan Grant forms another branch of the Seol Alpin, settling the dense pine forests of Strathspey. The men of Clan Grant use a specific rock formation named Craigellachie as a physical rallying point, lighting signal fires on the summit to gather their warriors for battle. Clan MacNab claims descent from the lay abbots of Killin, taking control of the land bordering the western edge of Loch Tay. The MacNabs establish a burial ground on the island of Inchbuay in the middle of the River Dockett, surrounding the graves with a dry stone wall. Clan MacFarlane, Clan MacKinnon, Clan Macaulay, and Clan Macquarie complete the 7 branches of the Seol Alpin. These clans populate the central glens and the islands of the Inner Hebrides, relying on cattle raiding and regional warfare to secure their newly claimed territories. The men undertake these raids by walking miles across the heather, under the cover of darkness, to steal livestock from neighboring valleys. The leaders of these clans speak Goidelic Gaelic, maintaining the linguistic traditions of Dalriata in their new eastern and central settlements. While the Kingdom of Alba consolidates power along the eastern river valleys, the Scandinavian fleets increase their military presence on the western seaboard. In the year 870 AD, a Norse warlord named Olaf the White commands a fleet of longships up the Firth of Clyde. The Norsemen drop heavy stone anchors outside Dumbarton Rock, a volcanic basalt plug rising 240 feet above the river. Dumbarton Rock serves as the fortified capital for the Britons of Strathclyde. Olaf the White and his Scandinavian warriors initiate a 4-month siege of the fortress, bringing a new era of Norse dominance to the Western Islands. The Norsemen blockade the fortress of Dumbarton Rock for 4 full months. Olaf the White and Ivar the Boneless command fleets of wooden longships, anchoring the vessels in the tidal mud of the River Clyde to cut off river access to the Britons living on the basalt plug. The defenders trapped inside the stone walls run out of fresh water during the winter months. In the year 871 AD, the Scandinavian warriors breach the dry stone ramparts using iron axes. The Norsemen take the surviving Britons captive, forcing the men and women into the open hulls of their longships. The oarsmen row the vessels across the Irish Sea, delivering the captives to the slave markets located in the Viking settlement of Dublin. Following the capture of Dumbarton Rock, Norse settlers expand their direct physical control over the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland. Norwegian kings claim legal ownership of these island territories, demanding annual tributes of silver bullion and walrus ivory from the local chieftains. The Scandinavian migrants construct rectangular longhouses on the Machair, the fertile grassy plains bordering the sandy beaches of the Outer Hebrides. They build the walls by stacking rounded fieldstones without wet mortar, packing the gaps with coastal turf to block the wind. They frame the roofs using imported pine timber and cover the wooden beams with layers of dried coastal grass. The settlers plant fields of oats in the sandy soil and hunt grey seals on the rocky shorelines using iron-tipped throwing spears. Over the next century, these Scandinavian men marry the local Gaelic-speaking women. Their children grow up in the coastal settlements, speaking a combination of Old Norse and Goidelic Gaelic. This specific intermarriage creates a biological and cultural population known in the historical record as the Gál Gaedhail, translating directly from Gaelic into English as the Foreign Gaels. The Gál Gaedhail weave and wear heavy woolen cloaks fastened at the shoulder with bronze ring pins, adopting the clothing styles of the native population. At the same time, the men utilize Scandinavian metalworking techniques, forging heavy iron broadswords and single-edged combat knives called sea axes. Stone carvers living in these hybrid communities cut runic alphabets into vertical stone crosses, placing traditional Scandinavian knotwork designs directly alongside Celtic Christian symbols. The merging of these Norse and Gaelic bloodlines forms the biological foundation for specific Highland clans. On the islands of Skye and Harris, Clan MacLeod establishes territorial control during the 13th century. The clan traces its genetic lineage to a local ruler named Leod. The name Leod originates from the Old Norse word Ljóta, which translates to the English word ugly. Leod gains possession of Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye by marrying the daughter of the local Norse seneschal. Dunvegan Castle sits on an elevated platform of volcanic basalt rock, projecting directly into a sheltered sea loch. The builders of Clan MacLeod construct a thick stone curtain wall around the perimeter of the rock, enclosing a central courtyard to defend against maritime attacks from rival clans. 300 miles to the northeast, in the flat peatlands of Caithness, Clan Gunn establishes a separate territorial boundary. The members of Clan Gunn claim direct biological descent from a Norse pirate named Sweyn Asleifsson. Monks record the physical actions and voyages of Sweyn Asleifsson on vellum pages in the 12th century text known as the Orkneyinga saga. Sweyn operates his maritime raiding expeditions from the island of Gersay in the Orkney archipelago. He commands wooden longships south through the coastal waters to raid the western coast of Scotland and the eastern coast of Ireland, stealing silver coins, woven textiles, and harvested grain. The descendants of Sweyn adopt the surname Gunn from the Old Norse name Gunny, a term translating directly to the word battle. The Gál Gaedhail communities maintain control of the western seaboard by developing specific naval technology. The boat builders adapt the Scandinavian longship design to create the Highland galley, known in the Gaelic language as a berlin. Shipwrights construct the berlin using the clinker method, overlapping planks of oak timber and fastening the wooden boards together with iron rivets. They install a single wooden mast in the center of the hull and rig a square sail woven from heavy linen. The vessels range in size from 12 to 40 oars, allowing the crews to row the galleys directly into the wind through the narrow straits of the Hebrides. The oarsmen navigate the treacherous waters of the Minch, the body of water separating the outer Hebrides from the Scottish mainland, transporting livestock and armed warriors between the islands. For over 2 centuries, the Norwegian monarchs dictate the laws of the Western Archipelago from their royal courts across the North Sea. Local chieftains of Norse and Gaelic descent pay taxes directly to the King of Norway to retain control of their island territories. In the year 1156 AD, a military leader named Somerled challenges this Scandinavian authority. Somerled possesses both Norse and Gaelic ancestry, holding the specific legal title of Regulus of Argyll. He gathers his regional supporters and prepares a fleet of wooden galleys off the coast of the island of Islay, equipping his men with iron swords and leather shields to fight the Norwegian king's fleet. On January 6, 1156 AD, Somerled launches 80 wooden galleys into the saltwater channels off the coast of the island of Islay. Somerled holds the specific Latin title Regulus of Argyll, dictating laws over the mainland coastal territories of western Scotland. He initiates this naval confrontation, known in historical records as the Battle of Epiphany, to seize physical control of the Hebridean Islands from Godred Olafsson. Godred Olafsson wears the iron crown of the King of Man and the Isles, ruling the archipelago as a vassal of the Norwegian monarch. Godred sails his fleet of heavy Scandinavian longships north from the Isle of Man across the Irish Sea to intercept Somerled's advancing forces. Somerled equips his sailors with a newly modified vessel called the Berlin. Shipwrights working in the sheltered sea locks of Argyll construct these berlins using green oak timber. They split the oak logs with iron wedges to create flexible wooden planks measuring 2 centimeters thick. They overlap the edges of these planks in a clinker-built fashion, driving iron rivets through the overlapping wood to secure the hull. The shipwrights press sheep's wool, soaked in heated pine tar, between the wooden planks to seal the gaps against the ocean water. The boat builders attach a specific steering mechanism to the rear of the vessel to increase maneuverability. They mount a hinged wooden stern rudder directly to the back post of the ship, replacing the traditional side-mounted steering oar used on older Norse longships. This stern rudder allows the helmsman to turn the Berlin sharply in the turbulent cross-currents of the Hebridean Straits. The sailors hoist square sails woven from heavy linen cloth, raising the fabric on a single central mast made from a stripped pine trunk. The crews of Somaled's 80 galleys row through the freezing winter spray of the Atlantic Ocean. The oarsmen sit on wooden benches, pulling ashwood oars through the salt water at a rate of 30 strokes per minute. The men wear thick wool tunics, coated in raw sheep's lanolin to repel the freezing rain. Elite warriors standing on the decks wear heavy chainmail shirts constructed from thousands of interlocking iron rings. They wear conical iron helmets featuring solid iron bars projecting downward to protect their noses. They grip iron-headed broadswords and wooden shields reinforced with horizontal leather bands and bronze rivets. Godred Olafsson meets Somaled's fleet in the open water off the eastern coast of Islay. The two naval forces clash by ramming the oak prows of their ships directly into the opposing wooden hulls. The soldiers throw iron grappling hooks attached to thick hemp ropes over the wooden gunwales, pulling the galleys together to create connected wooden platforms for close-quarters combat. Men fight hand-to-hand on the wet wooden decks, thrusting iron spearheads measuring 20 centimeters long through the linked iron rings of their opponent's armor. Blood from the wounded men mixes with the freezing salt water, pooling on the lower floorboards of the ships. The fighting continues throughout the daylight hours of January 6th. As the sun drops below the western horizon, the daylight fades and the heavily damaged fleets disengage. The captains order the surviving oarsmen to backwater and separate the tangled ships. Somaled and Godred Olafsson recognize the massive casualties sustained by both sides. The two commanders agree to physically divide the maritime kingdom to stop the ongoing slaughter. They sign a written treaty, splitting the Hebridean Islands into two distinct political territories. The treaty establishes a new geographic border at the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, the westernmost rocky point of the Scottish mainland. Godred Olafsson retains control of the Isle of Man and the islands positioned directly north of Ardnamurchan, including Skye, Lewis, and Harris. Somaled takes absolute control of the islands located south of this peninsula. He claims the large islands of Mull, Islay, Jura, Tiree, and Coll, integrating these territories into his mainland holdings in Argyll. Somaled justifies his legal claim to these southern islands through a prior marriage. 16 years earlier, in the year 1140 AD, Somaled married Ragnhild. Ragnhild is the direct biological daughter of Godred Olafsson's father, the previous king of Man. Somaled and Ragnhild produce 3 sons, named Dughal, Ranald, and Onghus. Somaled uses the royal bloodline of his wife to assert that his sons possess the legal right to inherit and rule the southern Hebrides. With the southern islands secured under his direct command, Somaled establishes an independent maritime empire. He constructs stone fortresses along the coastlines to defend his new territory. Workers quarry blocks of local limestone and grey schist to build Duniveg Castle on the southern coast of Islay. They position the fortress on a rocky promontory overlooking a deep water bay. Somerled's Berlins anchor safely in this bay behind a defensive stone curtain wall measuring 3 meters thick. Somerled supports the local economy of his new empire by patronizing the Gaelic monastic communities. He brings Cistercian monks from the European continent to establish a new stone abbey on the mainland peninsula of Kintyre, specifically at Sadell. The stonemasons at Sadell carve red sandstone blocks using iron mallets and chisels to build the vaulted ceilings of the abbey church. The monks, living in the abbey, cultivate large fields of oats and breed flocks of short-tailed sheep on the surrounding hillsides. They pay taxes to Somerled in the form of spun wool, harvested grain, and wheels of aged cheese. Somerled expands his military influence eastward, challenging the central authority of the Scottish king. Malcolm IV sits on the throne of Alba, ruling from the eastern cities of Perth and Dunfermline. King Malcolm issues written parchment charters granting western coastal lands to Norman knights, imposing feudal laws over the Gaelic and Norse populations. Somerled ignores the parchment charters. He continues to rule his maritime empire through the traditional Gaelic system of tanistry. In this system, the regional chieftains gather on a specific earthen mound to elect the most capable adult male relative to lead the tribe, physically handing the chosen leader a straight white wooden wand to symbolize his legal authority. In the year 1164 AD, Somerled issues a call to arms across the islands of Mull, Islay, and the mainland of Argyll. He commands his shipwrights to repair the oak hulls of the Berlins and orders the blacksmiths to forge new iron spearheads. He gathers an invasion force of over 10,000 armed men and loads them into 160 wooden galleys. The massive fleet sails north around the Mull of Kintyre and turns east, rowing directly up the tidal estuary of the River Clyde toward the eastern lowlands of the Scottish kingdom. In the autumn of the year 1164 AD, Somerled's fleet of 160 wooden galleys navigates the tidal waters of the River Clyde. The oarsmen row the clinker-built ships eastward against the river current toward the settlement of Renfrew. Renfrew functions as a newly established royal burgh under the direct command of King Malcolm IV. Walter Fitz-Alan holds the title of High Steward of Scotland and commands the royal army stationed at this specific settlement. Walter Fitz-Alan spots the square linen sails of the approaching galleys from the southern shoreline. He organizes a defense using heavy cavalrymen mounted on European war horses. These knights wear conical iron helmets and carry lances made of straight ash wood measuring 3 meters long. Somerled's men pull the oak hulls of their galleys onto the tidal mudflats of the riverbank. They march inland carrying iron broadswords and circular leather shields reinforced with bronze rivets. A physical engagement occurs on the flat, grassy plains adjacent to the river. During the hand-to-hand combat, a royal soldier thrusts an iron spearhead into Somerled. The spear punctures his iron chainmail shirt and inflicts a fatal wound in his torso. Somerled bleeds and dies on the grass at Renfrew. Upon witnessing the physical death of their commander, the Gaelic and Norse warriors stop fighting. They lift Somerled's body and carry him back to the deck of a waiting Berlin. The oarsmen push the galleys off the mudflats and row back westward into the Firth of Clyde, ending the military campaign against the Scottish crown. The sudden death of Somerled creates an immediate shift in territorial control across the western seaboard. His massive maritime empire fragments among his 3 surviving sons. These 3 men, named Dougal, Ranald, and Eongus, divide the coastal territories and the Hebridean islands using the traditional Gaelic system of divided land inheritance. Dougal claims the northern mainland territory of Lorne and the adjacent islands of Mull, Lismore, and Coll. He establishes a biological lineage that adopts the surname MacDougall, translating from Gaelic as the Sons of Doughall. The leaders of Clan MacDougall build massive stone fortresses to defend this new territory. They construct Dunolly Castle on a 90-foot high plug of volcanic basalt rock overlooking Oban Bay. The masons cut local schist stone using iron hammers and bind the blocks together with wet mortar made from crushed seashells, sand and water. The MacDougall clan leaders also build Dunstaffnage Castle, 3 miles to the north of Oban. They construct a quadrangular stone curtain wall measuring 3 meters thick on a promontory of conglomerate rock, pointing directly into the fast-moving tidal currents of Loch Etive. Inside the walls, they build a great hall using oak timber brought from the mainland forests. The MacDougalls anchor their fleet of wooden galleys in the sheltered bay below the castle walls, controlling the maritime traffic moving through the Firth of Lorne. Ranald, the second son, inherits the southern territories, including the Kintyre Peninsula and the fertile island of Islay. Ranald rules these agricultural lands until his death in the year 1207 AD. He leaves his territorial holdings to his son, a man named Donald. Donald governs the islands from a stone fortress located on the shores of Loch Finlagan on Islay. The specific Gaelic name Macdomnile originates directly from this ruler, creating the official biological line of Clan MacDonald. The men of Clan MacDonald identify themselves in battle by attaching a physical sprig of wild heather to their woven wool bonnets. The women extract a yellow dye from the stems of this heather plant by boiling the vegetation in iron pots filled with water over peat fires. They soak spun wool yarn in this heated yellow liquid to color the threads, before weaving the cloth on upright wooden looms. Donald commands a fleet of oak galleys from the freshwater stronghold of Finlagan. He places the physical image of a wooden berlin featuring a single square sail onto his personal wax seal. He presses this carved metal matrix into hot beeswax to authenticate legal parchment documents written by his scribes in the Latin language. This seal establishes the ship as the primary heraldic symbol of Clan MacDonald. Somerled's third son, Aonghus, takes control of the islands of Booty and Arran, situated in the Firth of Clyde. In the year 1210 AD, a violent physical conflict erupts between Aonghus and the sons of his brother Ranald. Aonghus dies from weapon wounds during this localized battle. His specific biological line ends with his death. The MacDonalds absorb the islands of Bute and Arran into their expanding territorial portfolio, taking physical possession of the livestock and grain-producing lands. The leaders of Clan MacDonald consolidate their power over the following century. They adopt the specific Latin title Dominus Insularum. This title translates directly to the English words Lord of the Isles. The MacDonald Lords of the Isles establish a sovereign court completely separate from the Scottish monarchy in Edinburgh. They maintain their own standing army of professional soldiers, known as Gallowglass. These Gallowglass warriors wear padded canvas coats, called akitons, underneath shirts of interlocking iron rings. They carry long-handled iron battle axes measuring 5 feet in length. The weapons require 2 hands to swing and feature wide, heavy blades capable of cutting through wooden shields and armor. The Lords of the Isles fund this private army by collecting rent from the tenant farmers living across the Hebrides. The farmers pay these taxes using physical goods, delivering wooden barrels of salted herring, woven wool blankets, and live short-horned black cattle directly to the MacDonald tax collectors. The MacDonalds load these physical goods onto their wooden galleys and transport the cargo across the Irish Sea to trade for silver coins in the coastal markets of Ulster. This economic engine allows Clan MacDonald to operate as an independent naval power off the western coast of Scotland. The Scottish kings sitting on the throne of Alba begin implementing new legal parchment structures to control these autonomous Highland rulers. In the year 1124 AD, King David I ascends the Scottish throne. He travels south to the English royal court and observes the land-holding practices of the Norman barons. He returns to the Scottish lowlands and introduces Norman feudalism to the legal structure of the kingdom. King David issues the first royal charters written on sheepskin parchment. Royal clerks write these legal documents in the Latin language using iron gall ink. The clerks melt blocks of beeswax over tallow candles, and they drip the hot wax onto the bottom edge of the parchment. They press the king's heavy lead matrix into the cooling wax to create a physical seal. These parchment charters establish a rigid legal framework dictated directly by the Crown, replacing the traditional Gaelic system of verbal land agreements. King David grants vast tracts of agricultural land in the Scottish borders and the eastern lowlands to specific Norman families. The men of these families ride heavy European war horses and wear interlocking iron chainmail shirts reaching down to their knees. A knight named Robert de Bruce receives the territory of Annandale in the year 1124 AD. The Royal Charter grants Robert the right to collect grain taxes from the tenant farmers living in the River Annan Valley. Another French-speaking noble, named Walter Fitz-Alan, receives the title of High Steward of Scotland. His descendants adopt the surname Stewart, altering the spelling to match the title of their royal office. A knight named Simon Fraser arrives in the borderlands of Tweeddale. The name Fraser originates from the French province of Anjou, specifically from the town of La Frézelière. The Fraser family paints white strawberry flowers on their wooden shields. They adopt the French word for strawberry, fraise, as the root of their botanical heraldry. The Scottish king requires these new feudal lords to construct motte and bailey castles to enforce military control over the rural population. Labourers dig deep circular ditches using iron spades and pile the excavated dirt into large conical mounds known as mottes. They cut down native oak trees using iron axes to build wooden palisades around the flat courtyards known as baileys at the base of the mounds. They construct square wooden keeps on the flat tops of the earthen mottes, providing an elevated firing position for archers using yew longbows. Couriers carry these written feudal charters north into the mountainous terrain of the Scottish Highlands. The Gaelic clan chiefs travel south to the royal court in Edinburgh and accept parchment charters from the Scottish kings. The clerks write the name of the clan chief on the parchment, establishing him as the sole legal owner of the specific glens and lochs occupied by his kindred. The charter gives the chief the legal right to collect monetary rent from the farmers cultivating the territory. The chiefs build stone castles on the edges of freshwater lochs to project this combined royal and regional authority. Masons cut blocks of local granite and sandstone to build thick curtain walls. They construct these fortresses on small islands and rocky promontories, using the surrounding water as a physical barrier against attacking infantry. While the Highland chiefs accept the feudal laws of the Crown regarding land ownership, they govern their people using the traditional Gaelic system of tanistry. The rules of tanistry require a council of leading men within the clan to gather and vote on the succession of the chief. The council selects a new leader from a specific group of men known as a Derbhfine. The Derbhfine consists of all male relatives sharing a common great-grandfather. The council evaluates the candidates based on physical strength, age, and military experience. They elect the most capable warrior to lead the clan into battle. The chosen successor receives the title of Tanist. He holds this title and prepares to assume command while the current chief remains alive. This specific electoral process ensures the clan maintains continuous adult military leadership, guaranteeing an experienced commander leads the army. The clan chiefs measure their political power by counting the exact number of armed men they can mobilize from their agricultural estates. The chiefs demand military service from the tenant farmers, a practice known as raising the Highland host. The agreements require the men to provide their own weapons and rations for 40 days of active military campaigning. The Highland men pack bags of ground oatmeal and carry iron-bladed broadswords when the chief summons them for war. The chiefs use these armed hosts to expand their territorial boundaries. They march their men across the heather-covered mountains to attack neighboring valleys, seizing herds of live cattle and claiming fertile grazing land for their own kindreds. The Scottish monarchs utilize these territorial disputes to maintain control over the northern regions. The kings issue legal warrants known as letters of fire and sword to specific clan chiefs. These parchment warrants authorize one clan to physically attack and subdue a rival clan on behalf of the state. The warrants grant the attacking warriors the legal right to burn wooden houses, steal cattle, and kill the members of the opposing kindred, granting them absolute legal immunity in the royal courts. The clerks stamp these warrants with the royal red wax seal, institutionalizing localized warfare across the Highlands and Islands. In the year 1286 AD, King Alexander III rides his horse along the coastal cliffs of Kinghorn in the dark. The horse falls over the edge, and the king dies on the rocky beach below. His physical death empties the Scottish throne. 14 different nobles present written legal claims to the Scottish crown in a process known as the Great Cause. King Edward I of England crosses the border with an army of English soldiers armed with steel longswords and yew longbows. The English troops occupy the Scottish castles, seizing physical control of the kingdom. The resulting wars of Scottish independence force the Highland clan chiefs to align their armed hosts with either the English occupation forces or the Scottish resistance leaders fighting to reclaim the kingdom. On June 23, 1314 AD, Robert the Bruce marshals the Scottish army on the muddy banks of the Bannock Burn. The Bannock Burn is a small tidal river flowing east into the wider River Forth. The Scottish soldiers dig cylindrical pits 3 feet deep into the clay soil along the Roman road leading north to Stirling Castle. They place iron caltrops with sharpened metal points into the grass to pierce the hooves of advancing war horses. They cover the pits with thin wooden branches and loose grass. King Edward II marches an army of 20,000 English soldiers northward to relieve the besieged English garrison at Stirling Castle. The English army brings a massive baggage train consisting of wooden carts pulled by teams of oxen. These carts carry canvas tents, iron cooking pots, and wooden barrels filled with salted beef and ale. The heavy English cavalry rides destriers, war horses bred specifically to carry men wearing 60 pounds of iron chainmail and steel plate armor. The English infantrymen carry yew longbows and shoot steel-tipped arrows measuring 30 inches long. On the afternoon of June 23rd, an English knight named Henry de Bohun rides his heavy warhorse across the field. He points his wooden lance directly at Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce sits on a small Highland pony, holding a short iron battle-axe. As the heavy warhorse charges past him, Bruce stands in his stirrups and swings the iron axe downward. The iron blade splits Henry de Bohun's steel helmet and fractures his skull, killing the English knight instantly. The wooden handle of the axe shatters in Bruce's hand from the physical force of the impact. Robert the Bruce positions his Scottish infantry in tightly packed circular formations known as schiltrons. He commands a specific reserve force positioned behind the front lines on the slopes of Coxet Hill. Angus Og MacDonald leads this reserve force of 5,000 Highland warriors and Islesmen. The men of Clan MacDonald carry iron broadswords and short-handled iron axes. They wear padded leather tunics smeared with rendered animal fat to block the cold rain falling on the encampment. Men from Clan Cameron, Clan Campbell, and Clan Grant stand in the ranks alongside the MacDonalds on the hill. The Highland men hold circular wooden shields coated with layers of stretched cowhide and secured with bronze rivets. They wait in the wet grass, while the English cavalry initiates the primary assault against the Scottish front lines below them. On the morning of June 24th, the English cavalry charges across the Carse, a flat expanse of boggy ground covered in peat and wet moss. The heavy English warhorses step onto the unstable ground and sink up to their knees in the wet mud. The Scottish infantrymen in the schiltrons lower ashwood spears measuring 12 feet long, presenting a solid wall of iron points to the advancing horses. The English warhorses crash directly into the iron spearheads. The horses collapse and the riders fall from their leather saddles into the mud. English archers stand on the flanks and shoot steel-tipped arrows into the Scottish formations. The arrows pierce the leather tunics and flesh of the Scottish soldiers. Robert the Bruce signals the Highland Reserve to enter the physical combat. Angus Og MacDonald orders his 5,000 Islesmen to advance down the slope of Coxet Hill. The Highland warriors sprint across the muddy ground and engage the English infantry with their iron broadswords. They swing their axes, cutting directly through the wooden shafts of the English spears. The physical impact of 5,000 charging men pushes the English front line backward. The English soldiers drop their weapons and run back toward the Bannock Burn. Hundreds of English soldiers drown in the tidal waters of the river, pushed down below the surface by the physical weight of their steel armor. King Edward II rides away from the battlefield on a fast horse, riding south to secure his physical escape behind the stone walls of Dunbar Castle. The physical victory at Bannockburn secures Robert the Bruce's direct control over the Kingdom of Scotland. He travels to his royal court and issues new parchment charters sealed with red beeswax to distribute land to the clan chiefs who provided military support. Robert the Bruce rewards Angus Og MacDonald with vast territorial grants on the western mainland. He signs a Latin charter transferring the coastal lands of Lochaber, Morven, and Ardnamurchan directly to Clan MacDonald. These specific territories previously belonged to Clan MacDougall. The leaders of Clan MacDougall aligned their military forces with the English crown and the rival Balliol faction during the war. Robert the Bruce strips the MacDougalls of these lands and reassigns them to Angus Og MacDonald to ensure loyalty on the western seaboard. The king grants the lands of Lorne to Sir Neil Campbell. Neil Campbell marries the king's sister, Mary Bruce. This marriage secures a direct biological link between Clan Campbell and the Scottish royal bloodline. Clan Campbell builds new stone castles on the shores of Loch Orr and Loch Fyne using quarried granite blocks. They expand their political and physical control over the western region of Argyll by collecting grain and cattle taxes from the tenant farmers living in these glens. Clan Grant receives royal land charters in the eastern valley of Strathspey. The men of Clan Grant take physical control of the timber forests growing along the banks of the River Spey. They cut down native pine trees to build timber halls and collect rents from the inhabitants of the valley. Other clans that fought at Bannockburn, including Clan Cameron, receive written charters confirming their ownership of lands around Loch Linnhe. The redistribution of these western and central lands establishes a new political hierarchy among the Highland clans. The MacDonalds consolidate their newly acquired mainland territories with their existing Hebridean island holdings. The combined landmass gives them control over hundreds of miles of coastline and thousands of tenant farmers. To manage this massive maritime empire, the MacDonald Lords of the Isles establish a formal administrative centre on the island of Islay. They transport oak timber and local stone to two small islands situated in the middle of a freshwater loch named Loch Finlagan. The workers construct a central meeting hall and a chapel on these islands, creating a localised government centre operating entirely separate from the Scottish Royal Court in Edinburgh. In the year 1380 AD, John of Islay commands his retainers to prepare the central administrative buildings at Finlagan. Loch Finlagan is a shallow freshwater body located on the eastern side of the island of Islay. Two small land masses, named Alien Moor and Alien na Comhairle, emerge from the dark water of the loch. Workers lay submerged stone causeways to connect the islands to the muddy shoreline. They construct a rectangular timber and stone hall on the larger island, Alien Moor. Men cut oak beams from the surrounding woodlands and transport the heavy timber across the loch in shallow rowboats. They roof the great hall with bundled reeds cut from the marshy edges of the water. Inside the hall, servants light peat fires in central stone hearths, filling the air with the smell of burning earth and wood smoke. John of Islay summons 14 specific regional chieftains to this freshwater centre. These men row their wooden galleys into the sheltered bays of Islay and ride small Garonne ponies inland to the loch. The arriving judges include the leaders of Clan MacLean, Clan MacLeod, Clan MacKinnon, and Clan MacNeil. These 14 men form the Council of the Isles. They walk across the stone causeway to the smaller island, Alien na Comhairle. The Gaelic name of this island translates directly to the Council Island. The judges sit on carved wooden benches inside a circular stone building with walls measuring over a metre thick. The 14 judges hear legal disputes brought forward by tenant farmers and regional lords. They issue physical decrees resolving land boundaries, cattle thefts, and unpaid grain taxes. Scribes working for the council write these legal decisions onto sheepskin parchment using hollowed goose quills dipped in iron gall ink. They draft these documents in both the Latin and Goidelic Gaelic languages. The scribes melt red beeswax over open candle flames and press the circular metal seal of the Lord of the Isles into the cooling wax. This seal displays the physical image of a clinker-built Berlin galley with its sail furled. These stamped parchments establish the Lordship of the Isles as a sovereign government on the western seaboard, operating completely separate from the royal courts in Edinburgh. The MacDonald Lords employ a specific family to maintain their historical records and legitimize their legal authority. Men from Clan MacMahorich hold the hereditary office of bards and genealogists to the lordship. The MacMahorich bards memorize centuries of exact biological lineages, reciting the names of fathers and grandfathers aloud during public ceremonies. They speak these names in a highly formalized register of classical Gaelic. They write praise poetry on vellum manuscripts, recording the specific military victories and territorial expansions of the MacDonald chiefs. The Lord of the Isles pays the MacMahorich bards by granting them direct ownership of agricultural lands in Kintyre, allowing them to collect rent in the form of live cattle and harvested barley. The council enforces its legal rulings through massive military capability. The Lords of the Isles maintain a standing naval force, consisting of hundreds of wooden galleys. They draft over 10,000 armed men from the surrounding islands and western mainland to row these ships. Boat builders at shipyards on the shores of Loch Linhee and the Sound of Mull construct these vessels using green oak timber. The shipwrights coat the overlapping wooden planks with heated pine pitch to waterproof the hulls. The air around the shipyards smells of this sharp, heated resin. When the council issues a military order, messengers light signal fires on the coastal hilltops, instructing the local chieftains to launch their fleets into the tidal currents. To supply this massive standing navy, the council commands the collection of physical taxes from the tenant farmers across the Hebrides. Tax collectors travel in shallow draft boats, gathering barrels of salted herring, woven wool blankets, and bags of ground oatmeal. They transport these goods back to central storehouses located near the coastal anchorages on Islay. Quartermasters distribute the salted fish and oatmeal directly to the oarsmen sitting on the wooden benches of the galleys. The rowers eat the cold rations while navigating the fast-moving waters of the Minch. Alongside the administrative buildings at Finlaggan, stonemasons construct a small chapel dedicated to St. Finlugan. The masons cut rectangular blocks of local limestone using iron chisels, laying the stone walls to enclose a space measuring roughly 10 meters long. During the inauguration of a new Lord of the Isles, the Bishop of Argyll and 7 priests wearing white linen robes conduct a religious mass inside this chapel. Following the mass, the new Lord steps out of the chapel and stands on a specific flat stone featuring a carved footprint. He places his bare foot into the stone depression. He holds a white wooden wand to symbolize his direct authority over the land and the people. The 14 judges of the council stand around him on the grass, pledging their military support and swearing oaths in the Gaelic language. The massive military power and absolute regional authority of the lordship on the western coast eventually pushes the MacDonalds to expand their territorial claims eastward. In the year 1411 AD, a new Lord of the Isles, named Donald MacDonald, issues a military summons to his regional chieftains. He demands the rapid mobilization of 10,000 Highland infantrymen from the islands and the western glens. He targets the earldom of Ross, a massive agricultural territory located on the eastern coast of the mainland. Donald orders his men to march eastward across the heather-covered Grampian Mountains, bringing the armed Highland host directly toward the lowland forces commanded by the Earl of Mar. On July 24, 1411 AD, Donald MacDonald, Lord of the Isles, marches an army of 10,000 Highland infantrymen onto the flat plateau of Harlaw. The plateau sits exactly 2 miles northwest of the market town of Inverurie, in the eastern region of Aberdeenshire. The Highland men arrive after walking east from the coastal town of Inverness. They carry iron broadswords measuring 36 inches long and short-handled iron axes. They wear heavy wool plaids coated in sheep's lanolin to repel the damp morning fog rolling off the North Sea. Donald brings this massive armed host to physically seize control of the Earldom of Ross, a lucrative agricultural territory producing hundreds of tons of oats and barley annually. Standing in direct opposition on the muddy field is Alexander Stewart, the Earl of Mar. The Earl commands a lowland army consisting of heavy cavalry and armoured spearmen defending the Eastern Territories. Robert Davidson, the Provost of Aberdeen, stands alongside the Earl, commanding a unit of city burgesses wearing boiled leather jerkins and carrying iron-tipped pikes. The Lowland Knights ride heavy European war horses, standing 16 hands high. These knights wear complete suits of steel plate armour, forged in the metalworking centres of Flanders and Milan. They secure the steel plates over their chests, arms and legs, using thick leather straps and iron buckles. The knights hold straight ash lances, topped with sharpened steel points, waiting in a horizontal line across the plateau. At exactly 10 in the morning, Donald MacDonald orders his Highland host to advance. The 10,000 Islemen sprint across the wet grass, yelling specific clan war cries in the Goidelic language. The Earl of Mar signals his heavy cavalry to initiate a countercharge. The armoured war horses gallop forward, plunging their iron-shod hooves deeply into the soft loam of the Grampian foothills. The horses crash directly into the unarmoured Highland infantry. The sheer physical momentum of the 1,600-pound horses knocks the leading ranks of the Islemen to the muddy ground. The Highland warriors use their numerical advantage to surround the lowland cavalry. The Islemen use iron hooks attached to the back of their Lochaber axes to catch the leather harnesses and steel stirrups of the knights. They pull the heavily armoured men from their saddles, dropping the knights into the mud. Once the knights hit the ground, the Islemen thrust narrow iron dirks through the unprotected gaps in the steel armour joints, specifically targeting the armpits and groins. The lowland knights swing steel longswords in wide arcs, cutting through the wooden shields and wool clothing of the Highland attackers. The physical combat devolves into hundreds of localized duels across the plateau. In the centre of the muddy field, the chief of Clan MacLean, a man known as Red Hector of the Battles, engages in direct hand-to-hand combat with Sir Alexander Irvine of Drum. Red Hector swings a heavy iron broadsword with both hands. Sir Alexander Irvine defends himself using a steel sword and a triangular wooden shield painted with 3 holly leaves. Hector swings his iron blade downward, cutting entirely through the interlocking iron rings protecting Sir Alexander's neck. Simultaneously, Sir Alexander thrusts his steel blade deeply into Hector's unprotected torso. The two commanders bleed heavily from their deep lacerations. They collapse into the wet soil and die simultaneously among the trampled heather. The air across the Harlaw Plateau fills with the literal smell of horse sweat, human blood, and freshly overturned earth. The soldiers fight continuously for 10 straight hours without breaking formation. The sun sets below the western horizon, dropping the ambient temperature of the battlefield. The lack of visibility forces the surviving men on both sides to stop swinging their weapons. They separate their formations and stand over the bodies of the dead in the darkness. When the sun rises the following morning, the staggering physical toll becomes visible on the grass. 900 Highland soldiers lie dead on the plateau, their blood soaking into the peat and clay. 500 lowland knights and city burgesses perish alongside them, their steel armour dented and pierced by iron axe heads. The massive volume of blood pooling in the muddy indentations of the field earns this specific confrontation the name Red Harlaw. The Provost of Aberdeen lies among the dead, surrounded by the bodies of the city burgesses he led into the fighting. Donald MacDonald surveys the depleted ranks of his Highland army. The 10-hour battle destroys his primary offensive capabilities. He lacks the numerical strength and physical supplies required to march further east and lay siege to the walled city of Aberdeen. Donald orders his surviving chieftains to gather their remaining men. The Highland host turns away from the eastern lowlands and begins the long walk westward, back toward the Great Glen. The men carry their wounded relatives on wooden litters constructed from pine branches. The Earl of Mar retains physical control of the battlefield, successfully blocking the eastern expansion of the Lordship of the Isles. The Lowland army collects the steel armor and iron weapons from the dead knights, loading the heavy metal onto wooden carts pulled by oxen. They bury the dead soldiers in mass trenches, dug deeply into the Harlaw mud. This specific military stalemate permanently halts the MacDonalds' attempts to conquer the eastern agricultural centres of Scotland. The Lord of the Isles returns his depleted forces to the western sea locks to rebuild his fleets and recruit new infantrymen. Over the next 80 years, the Scottish monarchs sitting on the throne in Edinburgh evaluate the military threat demonstrated by this massive Highland invasion. The kings draft new legal strategies and gather their own royal armies, preparing to systematically dismantle the political independence of the Western clan chiefs and permanently destroy the Lordship of the Isles. In May 1493 AD, King James IV sits in the royal court at Edinburgh Castle. He commands his clerks to draft a specific legal decree on sheepskin parchment. The decree officially strips John MacDonald of all his inherited lands, regional titles, and legal authority. James IV stamps the parchment with the royal seal, permanently forfeiting the Lordship of the Isles to the Scottish crown. John MacDonald surrenders his regional authority and travels to a stone monastery located in the lowland town of Paisley. King James travels west to physically enforce this legal forfeiture. He rides a heavy warhorse across the central highlands, bringing an armed escort of 500 lowland knights. The royal retinue arrives at Dunstaffnage Castle on the coast of Argyll. Dunstaffnage Castle features stone curtain walls measuring 10 feet thick, built upon a conglomerate rock promontory overlooking the tidal currents of Loch Etive. James establishes a temporary royal court inside the stone walls of the castle. He commands the Western clan chiefs to travel to Dunstaffnage. The Highland chieftains arrive in wooden galleys and bend their knees on the stone floor to submit directly to the Scottish king. The elimination of the MacDonald Lordship removes the central governing authority on the western seaboard. The regional chieftains immediately mobilize their own armed forces to seize the undefended coastal territories. Two specific clans, allied directly with the Scottish crown, exploit this lack of centralized command. Clan Campbell of Argyll moves westward from their territories around Loch Awe. The Earl of Argyll gathers his armed retainers and sails wooden galleys toward the islands of Islay and Jura. The Campbells use their royal backing to seize former MacDonald coastal estates. They install their own bailies to collect the grain taxes and cattle rents directly from the tenant farmers. The Campbell clerks write new land charters in Latin, recording the transfer of these coastal territories into the official Campbell registries. Simultaneously, Clan Gordon of Huntly expands their territorial holdings in the north. Alexander Gordon commands heavily armed cavalrymen across the Grampian Mountains, securing physical control over the fertile estates of the Earldom of Ross. The Scottish king appoints the leaders of Clan Campbell and Clan Gordon as royal lieutenants. He grants them the legal right to govern the Western and Northern Highlands on behalf of the state. The royal court in Edinburgh utilises a specific legal tool to control the remaining fractured kindreds. The king's clerks write documents known as letters of fire and sword. These parchment warrants authorise one specific clan chief to physically attack and destroy a rival clan. The royal clerks pour hot red beeswax onto the bottom of the parchment and press the royal matrix into the wax. Couriers ride horses along the dirt tracks, delivering these documents to the clan chiefs. The letters grant the attackers absolute legal immunity from prosecution. Men holding a letter of fire and sword possess the legal right to burn timber houses, steal livestock, and execute the members of the opposing kindred using iron broadswords and axes. These royal warrants initiate decades of localized warfare across the islands. Former allies within the dismantled lordship engage in physical combat against one another to secure agricultural land and coastal anchorages. Clan MacLeod of Dunvegan enters into a violent physical conflict with the MacDonalds of Sleat over territorial control of the Isle of Skye. The MacDonalds of Sleat assert physical ownership over the Trottenish Peninsula, a fertile stretch of basalt cliffs and grassy meadows on the northern end of Skye. The MacLeod warriors row clinker-built galleys across the coastal waters, landing on the beaches of the peninsula. They use iron-tipped torches to set fire to the dried heather roofs of MacDonald tenant farms. The MacDonalds retaliate by marching infantry across the mountain passes. The men wear thick wool plaids and carry iron dirks measuring 18 inches long. They drive stolen herds of short-horned black cattle through the steep glens and back to their own coastal settlements. The men butcher the stolen cattle using iron knives, salting the beef in wooden barrels to feed their retainers during the winter months. They leave the stripped cattle bones scattered in the mud outside their stone roundhouses. This constant raiding forces the Highland clans to maintain permanent armed garrisons at their coastal stone castles. The chiefs employ professional guards, known as buanachen, to patrol the defensive perimeters. The buanachen wear padded canvas jackets and carry long-handled Lochaber axes. The clan chiefs pay these soldiers directly with silver coins, imported wine, and stolen cattle. The soldiers sleep on wooden benches inside the castle halls, keeping their iron weapons sharpened using circular whetstones. Highland families rebuild their burned timber houses and replace their stolen livestock continuously throughout the 16th century. The clan armies fight these localized battles in deep mountain valleys, frequently covered in thick morning fog and heavy rain. The infantrymen require immediate visual methods to identify their allies and their enemies through the smoke of burning settlements and the coastal mist. The Highland weavers begin extracting specific chemical dyes from local plants and lichens. They boil the plant matter in iron pots to color spun wool yarn. The women weave the colored threads together on wooden upright looms. They arrange the horizontal weft and vertical warp threads to create distinct, repeating geometric patterns. They pack the threads tightly, using wooden combs to create heavy woolen garments capable of blocking the wind and rain. The clan chiefs adopt these specific woven patterns to outfit their armed retainers. In August of the year 1538 AD, clerks at the royal court of King James V write specific entries into the accounts of the Lord High Treasurer. The scribes use iron gall ink to record the physical purchase of Highland dress for the king. They document the exact cost of 3 ells of short Highland tartan. Tailors working in the royal palaces at Stirling and Falkland cut this multicolored woven wool using iron shears. They stitch the fabric into a specific garment known as a trews, tight-fitting trousers covering the legs and feet. The king wears these woven garments while hunting red deer in the dense pine forests of the Central Highlands. Highland women manufacture this woven fabric inside stone and turf houses located across the glens. They shear the raw wool from flocks of short-tailed sheep using iron hand shears during the summer months. They wash the raw fleece in the fast-moving water of the local burns to separate the heavy dirt and excess animal lanolin. Women spin this cleaned wool into continuous threads using wooden drop spindles weighted with circular stone whorls. They extract physical color from the surrounding landscape to dye these spun threads. They strip the bark from alder trees using iron knives and boil the wood strips in water over peat fires to create a black dye. They crush crottle, a specific grey lichen scraped from granite boulders, and steep it in boiling water to produce a deep reddish-brown color. They soak the wool threads in these heated iron pots until the animal fibers absorb the chemical pigments. The weavers arrange these colored threads on upright wooden looms, leaning against the interior stone walls of their houses. They stretch the vertical warp threads tight, using stone weights tied to the bottom ends. They pass wooden shuttles carrying the horizontal weft threads back and forth through the warp. The women use wooden combs to pack the threads tightly together, creating a thick, heavy fabric. They arrange the colors in specific intersecting bands. Weavers count the exact number of threads for each color block, a precise measurement known as the set. They reproduce these exact thread counts to create identical geometric grid patterns on multiple lengths of cloth. During the 16th century, weavers designed these patterns based entirely on the availability of local plant dyes in their specific geographic region. The association of specific thread sets with individual clan surnames formalizes later, emerging directly in the late 18th century. After the women weave the fabric on the wooden looms, they shrink the wool to increase its water resistance in a process known as walking. A group of women sit around a long grooved wooden table. They soak the newly woven woolen cloth in wooden tubs filled with hot water and aged human urine. The ammonia in the urine breaks down the natural oils and tightens the animal fibers. The women pull the wet fabric from the tubs and strike it rhythmically against the wooden table boards. They pass the heavy cloth clockwise around the table, kneading the material with their bare hands to shrink the width by exactly 1/3. They wash the cloth in the river to remove the ammonia smell and lay it flat on the grass to dry in the wind. The Highland men wear this finished fabric as a single, large rectangular garment known as the filage mor, translating from Gaelic as the Great Plaid. The weavers create the Great Plaid by stitching 2 lengths of woven wool together along the long edge. The finished rectangle measures exactly 2 meters wide and 5 meters long. A Highland soldier lays a leather belt flat on the ground and lays the wool fabric directly over it. He folds the center of the fabric into distinct vertical pleats. He lies down on top of the pleated wool, pulls the fabric around his waist, and buckles the leather belt tightly. He takes the remaining upper half of the wool and pins it to his left shoulder using an iron brooch. This specific physical arrangement leaves the man's right arm entirely free to swing an iron broadsword or thrust an ashwood spear. The Highland infantrymen wear this heavy woven wool as they march into physical combat. The thick fabric blocks the freezing rain and insulates the men from the wet ground when they sleep on the heather. The men require immediate visual markers to distinguish their own kindred from rival clans during close-quarters combat. They adopt specific botanical plant badges as physical identifiers. Before a battle, the men walk into the marshes and hillsides to harvest specific vegetation. The men of Clan MacDonald break branches of purple heather and pin the stems directly to the side of their woven blue bonnets. The warriors of Clan Campbell pull sprigs of bog myrtle from the wet peat bogs, attaching the fragrant green leaves to their wool caps. Clan Fraser men cut white strawberry flowers, and Clan Cameron men harvest oak branches. The soldiers look for these specific plants on the heads of the men standing next to them in the shield walls to verify their allegiance. The clan commanders utilize specific auditory signals to organize their men across the wide battlefields. The chiefs adopt distinct war cries known in the Goidelic language as slughorns. The men yell these specific phrases loudly to coordinate physical charges and rally retreating soldiers. The slughorns frequently name a prominent geographical feature located directly within the clan's ancestral territory. The men of Clan Grant shout the phrase, "Stand fast, Craigellachie." Craigellachie is a specific rocky outcrop located in the Strathspey Valley. Clan Macmillan warriors yell the name of their local mountain, Ben Lawes. The sound of these geographical names projects across the battlefields, allowing scattered infantrymen to locate their commanders through the grey smoke of burning villages. The clan chiefs reinforce this visual allegiance by distributing metal crest badges to their armed retainers. Silversmiths working in the coastal towns cast these badges using two-piece clay molds. The badges feature the specific heraldic crest of the chief, granted to him directly by the Lord Lion King of Arms in Edinburgh. Silversmiths cast the physical shape of a boar's head for the men of Clan Campbell, matching the animal head carved above the entrance of the chief's stone castle. They surround the central crest with a physical representation of a leather strap and a fastened iron buckle. The men pin these silver or bronze badges to their wool bonnets. The physical strap and buckle design visually marks the man wearing the badge as a retainer fighting in the chief's army. These woven wool garments, plant badges, and metal crests outfit the Highland armies as political tensions escalate across the British Isles. In August of the year 1644 AD, a new military commander travels into the Central Highlands carrying physical orders from King Charles I. James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose, walks into the territory of Blair Athol. He wears a traditional Highland plaid and carries a broadsword. He commands the clan chiefs to gather their armed hosts and prepare their men for a massive civil war against the Scottish Covenanter armies. In August of the year 1644 AD, James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose, walks into the grassy fields of Blair Athol in the Central Highlands. He carries a written commission signed by King Charles I. This parchment grants him the exact title of Captain General of Royalist Forces in Scotland. Montrose wears a woven wool plaid and a steel breastplate protecting his torso to signal his military authority. He orders his officers to raise the royal standard on a vertical wooden pole. Clan chiefs from the surrounding glens see the flag and bring their armed retainers to the encampment. The chiefs bring men from Clan Cameron, Clan MacDonald, and Clan Maclean, forming a combined royalist army on the wet grass. A military commander named Alasdair MacCollar marches into the camp at Blair Athol. MacCollar brings 2,000 veteran soldiers directly from the conflict in Ireland. These Irish infantrymen carry matchlock muskets measuring 4 feet in length. The soldiers light slow-burning hemp cords soaked in potassium nitrate to ignite the gunpowder resting in the firing pans of these heavy muskets. MacCollar joins forces with Montrose to fight against the Covenanter armies controlling the Scottish lowlands. The Covenanters wear uniform grey wool coats and support the Scottish Parliament in direct opposition to the king. MacColla trains the combined force of Irish veterans and Highland clansmen to execute a specific physical military tactic. Historical records label this maneuver the Highland Charge. The clansmen form tight horizontal lines across the battlefield. They pack loose black gunpowder and spherical lead bullets into the iron barrels of their muskets. The men walk forward over the heather until they stand exactly 50 paces from the enemy line. They raise the muskets, press the burning hemp cords into the pans, and fire a single synchronized volley of lead bullets directly into the opposing ranks. The clansmen immediately drop the heavy wooden muskets onto the ground. They draw iron broadswords measuring 36 inches long and pull iron dirks from their leather belts. They sprint forward directly into the thick cloud of grey sulphurous smoke created by their own gunpowder volley. The men hold circular wooden targes covered in studded cowhide on their left arms to deflect incoming steel bayonets. The physical speed of the sprint allows the clansmen to crash into the enemy infantry before the opposing soldiers have time to reload their empty muskets. They swing the heavy iron swords downward with both hands, cutting through the wooden pikes and wool coats of the Covenanter troops. The leaders of Clan MacDonald supply thousands of men to Montrose's growing army. The MacDonalds utilize this royalist campaign to attack their specific regional rivals, Clan Campbell. The Earl of Argyll commands Clan Campbell and leads the Covenanter government forces. In December of the year 1644 AD, MacColla and the MacDonald infantry march through heavy winter snow directly into the Campbell territory of Argyll. The royalist soldiers use iron torches to ignite the thatched roofs of the Campbell tenant farms. They steal herds of black cattle from the enclosed winter pastures. They drive the animals away and butcher them to feed the marching army, leaving the bones in the mud. The MacDonalds burn the wooden grain storehouses and use iron axes to cut down the fruit trees growing around the stone castles of Loch Fyne. The smoke from the burning farms fills the narrow valleys along the coast. On February 2nd, 1645 AD, the two armies meet at the Battle of Inverlochy. The Covenanter forces, under the Earl of Argyll camp, near the stone walls of Inverlochy Castle, situated directly on the shores of Loch Linnhe. The Campbell soldiers sleep in canvas tents, pitched on the freezing ground. Montrose marches his royalist army for 36 hours through the snow-covered passes of the Ben Nevis mountain range. The men walk through freezing river water and deep snowdrifts to position themselves on the steep slopes directly above the Campbell camp. At sunrise, Montrose orders the attack. The royalist trumpeters blow brass horns, pushing the sound across the cold morning air. MacColla leads the Highland charge down the snowy slopes. The MacDonald infantrymen fire their muskets and sprint into the Campbell lines with drawn broadswords. The physical impact breaks the Campbell formations immediately. The Campbell soldiers run toward the shingle shoreline of Loch Linnhe and the steep slopes of the surrounding hills. The royalist soldiers pursue the fleeing men for 9 miles along the muddy banks of the loch. The MacDonald warriors use their iron swords and axes to cut down the retreating Covenanter troops. 1,500 Campbell soldiers die on the frozen grass and in the freezing salt water of the loch. The Earl of Argyll watches the destruction of his clan army from the deck of a wooden galley anchored in the deep water. He orders his oarsmen to row the galley away down the loch, leaving his infantrymen dead on the shore. Montrose leads his royalist army to several more victories across Scotland over the next 6 months. The Covenanter army eventually defeats Montrose at the Battle of Philiphaugh in September of the year 1645 AD. Montrose flees across the North Sea to the European continent. He returns to Scotland in the year 1650 AD to initiate a new military campaign. He lands on the northern coast with a small force of Danish mercenaries. A local chieftain named MacLeod of Assynt captures Montrose at Ardvrek Castle. Ardvrek Castle sits on a rocky promontory projecting into Loch Assynt in the region of Sutherland. MacLeod hands Montrose over to the Covenanter government forces in exchange for a physical reward of silver coins and 400 bowls of sour oatmeal. The Covenanter soldiers transport Montrose south to the city of Edinburgh. On May 21, 1650 AD, guards escort Montrose to the Market Cross on the Royal Mile. Executioners build a wooden gallows measuring exactly 30 feet tall on the cobblestone street. Montrose wears a black cloth suit, decorated with silver lace and a scarlet wool cloak. The executioner places a thick hemp rope around Montrose's neck and pushes him from the wooden platform. The rope snaps his neck, killing him instantly. The executioner lowers the body and uses an iron axe to sever Montrose's head, arms, and legs. Soldiers carry the severed limbs to the gates of 4 different Scottish cities. They push the flesh onto the iron spikes of the masonry walls, leaving the body parts exposed to the wind and rain. The execution of Montrose stops the royalist rebellions temporarily, leaving the clan rivalries unresolved in the Western Glens. The Highland families return to their valleys and rebuild their stone roundhouses with fresh timber. The MacDonalds and Campbells continue to raid each other's cattle herds across the steep mountain passes. The Scottish government in Edinburgh relies on armed military garrisons to monitor the physical activities of the clan chiefs. 42 years later, in February of the year 1692 AD, government soldiers march into the steep, snow-filled valley of Glencoe. The soldiers carry written orders, signed by the Secretary of State, instructing them to execute the MacDonald inhabitants currently sleeping in their timber houses. On December 31st, 1691 AD, Alistair MacDonald, the chief of the Glencoe MacDonalds, walks through deep snow to the wooden gates of Fort William. He travels to swear a legal oath of allegiance to King William III. The Scottish government demands this specific written oath from all Highland clan chiefs by the final day of the year. The Scottish government designates only civilian sheriffs to record these oaths. The military commander at Fort William, Colonel John Hill, issues a physical letter of protection and directs Alistair MacDonald to the town of Inverarray to find the civilian magistrate. Alistair MacDonald walks south across the frozen peat bogs of the Argyll Mountains for 3 days. He arrives in Inverarray on January 2nd, 1692 AD. The civilian sheriff, Sir Colin Campbell, detains Alistair for 3 days before writing the official oath on sheepskin parchment on January 6th. The parchment document travels south via horse couriers to the Scottish government offices in Edinburgh. John Dalrymple, the Secretary of State for Scotland, receives the delayed document. John Dalrymple holds a specific legal warrant signed in black ink by King William III. This parchment warrant grants Dalrymple the authority to deploy military force against Highland clans resisting the government. Dalrymple drafts a written directive instructing military commanders to march troops directly into the Glencoe Valley and execute the MacDonald inhabitants. On February 1st, 1692 AD, Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon marches 120 soldiers into the steep gorge of Glencoe. The River Coe flows through the center of this narrow valley, cutting a channel through solid volcanic rock. The soldiers belong to the Earl of Argyll's regiment of foot. They wear red wool coats dyed with madder root and carry iron matchlock muskets. The MacDonalds of Glencoe follow the traditional Highland code of hospitality, providing physical shelter and cooked food to the visiting soldiers. The government troops divide into small units and sleep inside the timber and turf roundhouses of the MacDonald families. The soldiers eat boiled oats and salted beef provided by their hosts. They sit beside the central stone hearths, playing card games with the MacDonald men for 12 consecutive days. On the evening of February 12th, a military courier rides a horse into the Glencoe Valley from the neighbouring settlement of Ballachulish. The courier delivers a folded parchment letter to Captain Robert Campbell. Major Robert Duncanson signs the paper. The ink on the page orders Captain Campbell to initiate a coordinated physical attack on the MacDonalds at exactly 5 in the morning on the following day. The written orders instruct the soldiers to kill every MacDonald under the age of 70 using iron swords and lead musket balls. At 5 in the morning on February 13th, 1692 AD, the ambient temperature in the valley drops below freezing. Heavy snow falls from the dark sky, accumulating in drifts measuring 3 feet deep across the valley floor. The government soldiers wake up inside the MacDonald houses. They load their iron muskets with black gunpowder and spherical lead bullets. They attach sharpened steel bayonets to the wooden stocks of their weapons. The troops point the loaded muskets at the sleeping MacDonald families and pull the iron triggers. The musket fire fills the enclosed timber houses with thick, sulphurous smoke and loud, concussive noise. In the settlement of Invercoe, soldiers shoot Alistair MacDonald in the back as he rises from his wooden bed. He dies on the dirt floor of his bedroom. The soldiers pull the gold rings directly from the fingers of Alistair's wife, using their teeth. In the adjacent settlement of Inverrigan, soldiers tie 9 MacDonald men together, using thick hemp ropes. They stand the tied men against an external dry stone wall and execute them using a synchronized volley of musket fire. Captain Campbell commands his troops to systematically move through the 3 primary settlements of the valley, pushing steel bayonets into the torsos of 38 specific individuals. The physical noise of the gunfire wakes the remaining inhabitants of the valley. Men, women, and children run out of their timber houses, leaving their heavy wool cloaks and leather shoes inside the rooms. They climb the steep, snow-covered slopes of the Pap of Glencoe and the Three Sisters mountain ridges. The government soldiers use burning peat extracted from the hearths to ignite the dried heather roofs of the MacDonald houses. The timber roof beams collapse inward, burning the wooden furniture and woven wool blankets. The soldiers gather the physical wealth of the clan, driving 900 black cattle, 200 Highland ponies, and hundreds of short-tailed sheep out of the valley through the western snowdrifts. They drive these animals to the garrison at Fort William to sell them for silver coins. The fleeing MacDonalds hide in the narrow rock crevices of the surrounding mountains. The freezing wind drops the temperature of the air, freezing the moisture on the skin and clothing of the survivors. Over the next 2 days, 40 women and children die from physical exposure to the freezing temperatures. Their bodies remain buried under the falling snow on the high mountain passes. The surviving members of the clan walk to neighboring glens to seek physical shelter with allied kindreds. The physical details of the massacre spread through printed paper broadsides across the cities of Edinburgh and London. The Scottish population identifies the event as a direct violation of murder under trust. Murder under trust is a specific Scottish law carrying the exact same legal penalty as treason. The law mandates the death penalty for the execution of a host by their invited guest, or a guest by their host. The Scottish Parliament launches an official legal inquiry in the year 1695 AD. The written findings of the inquiry force John Dalrymple to resign his government position. The destruction of the Glencoe MacDonalds solidifies deep political resentment against the British government across the Highland Glens. The clan chiefs gather their iron broadswords and wait for an opportunity to depose the monarchs sitting on the throne in London. 53 years later, on August 19, 1745 AD, a French ship carrying a prince named Charles Edward Stuart drops an iron anchor off the western coast. He steps onto the wet sand at Glenfinnan, carrying a red silk standard and demanding the immediate restoration of his royal bloodline. On August 19, 1745 AD, a French frigate drops an iron anchor in the coastal waters of Loch Nan Uav. Prince Charles Edward Stuart steps off a wooden rowboat onto the wet sand of the Scottish mainland. He walks inland to a narrow valley named Glenfinnan, situated at the head of Loch Shiel. He carries a large standard made of red, white and blue woven silk. He orders the Marquis of Tullibardine to raise this silk flag on a tall wooden pole. Charles demands the immediate physical restoration of the House of Stuart to the British throne. Donald Cameron of Lochiel marches into the valley, leading 800 men from Clan Cameron. The men walk across the wet heather, carrying iron broadswords and circular wooden shields covered in studded cowhide. Alexander MacDonald of Keppoch arrives with 300 armed retainers. These Highland clans form the physical core of a new Jacobite army. The men swear oaths in the Goidelic language to fight for the Stuart bloodline and reclaim the royal seat in London. The Jacobite army marches southeast through the Grampian Mountains, travelling along dirt roads and military gravel paths built by General George Wade. The Highland men sleep on the wet ground, wrapped in their heavy wool plaids. They hunt wild red deer and forage for oats to sustain their marching columns. On September 17, 1745 AD, the army arrives at the stone walls of Edinburgh. The clansmen enter the city through the Netherbow Port, taking physical control of the cobblestone streets while keeping their muskets loaded and unfired. They install Charles Edward Stuart in the Palace of Holyrood House, a royal residence constructed of sandstone at the bottom of the Royal Mile. Sir John Cope commands a British government army stationed just outside the city. On September 21, 1745 AD, the Jacobite army marches east to meet Cope's forces near the coastal town of Prestonpans. The government troops stand in rigid linear formations on a harvested field of wheat stubble. They carry smoothbore flintlock muskets and wear uniform red wool coats. At sunrise, a local farmer named Robert Anderson leads the Highland army through a narrow path hidden inside a dense marshland. The clansmen emerge from the morning fog directly on the right flank of the government lines. The Highlanders execute the Highland charge. They fire a single volley of lead bullets, drop their wooden firearms onto the mud, and sprint across the stubble field, screaming their clan slughorns. They swing their heavy iron broadswords, cutting through the wooden musket stocks and red wool coats of the British regulars. The physical combat lasts exactly 10 minutes. The government line breaks, and hundreds of soldiers run away from the battlefield toward the coast. The Jacobites capture the government baggage train, taking physical possession of gunpowder barrels, canvas tents, and a wooden chest containing £3,000 in silver coins. Charles Edward Stuart uses these silver coins to purchase food and iron weapons for his expanding army. On November 8, 1745 AD, the Jacobite force crosses the River Esk, walking directly into English territory. 5,000 Highland infantrymen march southward through the English counties of Cumberland and Lancashire. They cover an average of 12 miles per day on foot, wearing out the leather soles of their shoes on the frozen dirt roads. On December 4th, 1745 AD, the Jacobite army reaches the market town of Derby. Derby sits exactly 130 miles north of London. Charles Edward Stuart establishes his military headquarters inside a brick house on Full Street. He expects English royalist sympathizers and French infantry regiments to arrive and reinforce his Highland army. The local English population locks their wooden doors and hides their livestock in the surrounding forests. The French naval commanders keep their infantry regiments on the European continent, holding their ships anchored in French ports. On December 5, 1745 AD, Lord George Murray convenes a council of the clan chiefs inside the brick house in Derby. Murray presents specific written military intelligence detailing 3 separate British government armies, currently converging on their position. These government forces total over 30,000 men, armed with flintlock muskets and bronze cannons. The clan chiefs sit around a wooden table and vote to retreat back to Scotland to protect their supply lines and their ancestral territories. Charles Edward Stuart demands a continued march toward London. The chiefs cast their votes to walk north, overriding his command. On December 6, 1745 AD, the Highland army turns around and walks north. Snow falls heavily on the marching columns, dropping the temperature below freezing. The clansmen wrap their woven wool plaids tightly around their shoulders to block the biting wind. The Duke of Cumberland takes command of the primary British pursuit force. He rides north with thousands of regular infantrymen and regiments of heavy cavalry riding European war horses. The Jacobite army crosses back over the Scottish border on December 20th, 1745 AD. They march through the freezing rain of the central lowlands and turn north toward the Highland Mountains. On January 17, 1746 AD, the retreating Jacobite army halts at Falkirk Muir. They fight a pursuing government force commanded by General Henry Hawley. A severe winter storm blows heavy rain and hail directly into the faces of the government soldiers. The rain saturates the paper cartridges, ruining the government gunpowder and silencing their muskets. The Highland clansmen execute a charge through the freezing mud, cutting down the government dragoons with their iron broadswords. The Jacobites win the physical confrontation and capture several bronze cannons. The Highland army resumes its march north into the Grampian Mountains. The men exhaust their supply of silver coins. They eat small rations of raw oats mixed with cold river water. The extreme winter temperatures and lack of calories cause hundreds of clansmen to contract dysentery and typhus. Sick men collapse in the coastal villages and remain there on the dirt floors of abandoned houses. By April of the year 1746 AD, the starving Jacobite army arrives at the coastal town of Inverness. The men sleep on the wet ground outside the town, watching the empty horizon for French supply ships. The Duke of Cumberland marches his well-fed government army into the neighboring coastal town of Nairn. On the morning of April 16, 1746 AD, the two armies converge on a flat, boggy expanse of land, covered in wet heather and coarse grass. On April 16, 1746 AD, a freezing rain sweeps across Drumossie Moor. Drumossie Moor sits exactly 5 miles east of the coastal town of Inverness. The land consists of flat peat bogs, wet sphagnum moss, and patches of thick purple heather. Charles Edward Stuart positions his army of 5,000 Highland clansmen on this open ground. The men of Clan Cameron, Clan Stuart, Clan Chatton, and Clan MacDonald stand in horizontal lines stretching across the moor. They hold iron broadswords, short-handled axes, and circular wooden targes covered in studded cowhide. The men lack physical rations. They ate a single biscuit of baked oats in the preceding 24 hours. They stand in the freezing rain, sinking into the wet peat up to their leather shoes. Exactly 400 yards away, the Duke of Cumberland aligns a British government army of 8,000 regular soldiers. The government troops wear uniform red wool coats, white linen crossbelts, and tricorn hats made of pressed beaver felt. They carry brown Bess flintlock muskets fitted with 17-inch steel bayonets. Quartermasters issued these men rations of salted pork, aged cheese, and baked wheat bread at dawn. Cumberland positions 10 bronze 3-pounder cannons in the gaps between his frontline infantry regiments. Artillerymen load the cannons with linen bags filled with spherical iron musket balls. This specific type of ammunition bears the name grape shot. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the government artillerymen push burning slow matches into the touch holes of the bronze cannons. The ignited gunpowder propels the iron grape shot across the 400 yards of open moorland. The iron balls strike the tightly packed ranks of the Highland clansmen. The physical impact of the grape shot shatters the wooden shields and tears through the human flesh and woven wool plaids of the front ranks. The government cannons fire continuously for 20 minutes. The Jacobite clansmen stand strictly in their formations, while the artillery fire kills hundreds of men. Lord George Murray commands the right wing of the Highland Army. He waits for a physical order from Charles Edward Stuart to initiate the traditional Highland charge. At 1:20 in the afternoon, the men of Clan Chattan break their formation. They draw their iron broadswords and run directly toward the government lines, without waiting for the official command. The men of Clan Cameron and Clan Stuart follow them, sprinting across the wet moorland. The Highland men encounter a deep depression filled with standing water in the center of the battlefield. The freezing bog water and soft peat mud slow their physical momentum. The government infantrymen level their flintlock muskets and fire synchronized volleys of lead bullets directly into the advancing clansmen. The surviving Highlanders reach the front lines of Barrel's 4th Regiment of Foot and Munro's 37th Regiment. The clansmen swing their heavy iron broadswords, cutting into the wooden stocks of the muskets and the bodies of the government soldiers. The government troops employ a specific bayonet drill developed by the Duke of Cumberland over the preceding winter. Instead of stabbing the soldier directly in front of them, each government infantryman thrusts his steel bayonet to his right side. This specific angle bypasses the wooden targe held on the clansman's left arm. The steel blade drives directly into the unprotected ribs and torso of the attacking Highland warrior. The organized bayonet thrusts block the Highland advance entirely. The government's second line fires another volley of lead musket balls into the concentrated mass of clansmen pushing against the front line. The physical resistance and continuous gunfire force the Highland men to step backward. The government dragoons, mounted on heavy European cavalry horses, ride around the flanks of the Jacobite army. The dragoons carry steel sabres, measuring 35 inches long. They swing these sabres downward from their saddles, cutting the fleeing clansmen on the back of the neck and shoulders. The entire physical confrontation ends in less than 1 hour. The Highland army collapses, and the surviving men run west toward the stone buildings of Inverness. 1,500 Jacobite soldiers lie dead on the wet heather of Drumossie Moor. The blood from the wounds mixes with the freezing rain and drains into the porous peat bog. The government troops walk across the battlefield carrying fixed steel bayonets. They push the steel blades directly into the chests of the wounded Highland soldiers lying on the ground. The Duke of Cumberland orders his men to search the surrounding dry stone farmhouses and wooden barns. The soldiers locate wounded Jacobites hiding inside these agricultural structures and execute them using musket fire. Charles Edward Stuart rides a horse away from the battlefield, accompanied by a small escort of Irish cavalrymen. He rides west into the mountainous terrain of the Central Highlands. He hides in coastal caves and stone bothies for 5 months before boarding a French ship to return to the European continent. His physical departure permanently ends the Stuart claim to the British throne. The Duke of Cumberland establishes his military headquarters inside the town of Inverness. He orders his quartermasters to collect the iron broadswords and wooden targes dropped on the moor. The government troops load these captured weapons onto wooden carts. Cumberland drafts specific written orders instructing his soldiers to march directly into the western glens. The government troops march across the Grampian Mountains, carrying letters of fire and sword. They burn the timber houses of the clan chiefs who supported the Jacobite cause. They steal the black cattle and sheep from the highland pastures, driving the animals south to sell in lowland markets. On August 1st, 1746 AD, the British Parliament in London passes a series of new laws known collectively as the Act of Proscription. The government clerks write these laws on parchment and distribute them to military commanders across Scotland. The laws contain specific legal instructions designed to dismantle the military threat of the Highland clans and completely erase the physical markers of their culture. On August 1st, 1746 AD, members of the British Parliament in London draft a legislative document known as the Act of Proscription. Clerks write the text on vellum using iron gall ink. The document contains specific legal instructions intended to permanently dismantle the military capabilities of the Highland clans. The text mandates the surrender of all weapons across the northern counties. The law requires Highland men to hand over their iron broadswords, short-handled dirks, and flintlock muskets to local government officials. British government soldiers stationed at Fort William and Fort Augustus march through the Highland glens to enforce this edict. The soldiers search the timber and turf roundhouses of the tenant farmers, physically extracting iron blades and lead musket balls from the dwellings. Government troops collect the surrendered iron weapons and load them onto wooden wagons. Blacksmiths in the lowland cities melt these confiscated blades down in high-temperature furnaces to cast iron tools and cooking pots. Highland blacksmiths heat their own forges and hammer iron exclusively into agricultural plows and horseshoes to avoid arrest by the military patrols. A specific section of the Act of Proscription bears the title of the Dress Act. This section targets the physical clothing worn by the Highland population. The legislation penalizes any man or boy residing in Scotland who wears the filage moor, the great plaid, or garments made of multicolored tartan wool. Parliament outlaws the weaving of wool into these intersecting geometric sets. Weavers dismantle their wooden upright looms and stop boiling alder bark and crottal lichen to create dyes. Highland men adopt lowland clothing styles to comply with the written law. They cover their bodies in breeches made of undyed canvas and jackets constructed from plain grey wool. The parliamentary clerks record strict physical punishments for individuals violating these new laws. Magistrates sit behind elevated wooden benches in Edinburgh and Inverness to hear the cases. They read the parchment charges and strike wooden gavels to finalize the sentences. The magistrates sentence first-time offenders to 6 months of physical imprisonment inside stone jails. Guards lock these men inside unheated cells using heavy iron keys. When a magistrate convicts a man of a second offense, the judge signs a warrant for penal transportation. Guards secure the wrists and ankles of the convicted Highland men using heavy iron chains. They load the prisoners into the wooden hulls of transatlantic sailing ships. Shipwrights build these vessels using oak planks sealed with heated pine tar. The sailors hoist canvas sails and navigate the ships across the Atlantic Ocean. The journey takes 8 weeks, subjecting the prisoners below deck to scurvy and seasickness. The ships deliver the prisoners to British colonies in North America and the Caribbean. The Highland men complete 7 years of forced manual labor in these locations. In the Caribbean colonies of Jamaica and Barbados, they swing iron machetes to harvest thick stalks of sugarcane under the direct heat of the tropical sun. Overseers on horseback carry leather whips to enforce the daily labor quotas. In the year 1747 AD, members of Parliament passed the Heritable Jurisdictions Act. For centuries, clan chiefs operated local courts on their estates, holding the legal right of pit and gallows. They possessed the legal authority to sentence men to imprisonment in stone pits or execution by hanging from wooden gallows. The new Parliamentary Act revokes these specific powers entirely. The Crown appoints official sheriffs and justices of the peace to preside over the Highland districts. These appointed government officials travel circuits on horseback to hear legal disputes, collect fines, and issue judgments. The new laws remove the legal right of the chiefs to raise a private army. The chiefs release their armed retainers from military service. The chiefs travel south by horse-drawn carriages along the gravel roads connecting Edinburgh to London. They purchase tailored coats made of imported silk and linen shirts with ruffled collars. They pay silver coins to rent brick townhouses in the urban centres of England, integrating themselves into the commercial society of the British Empire. They transition their daily operations from military commanders into commercial landowners. To fund this urban lifestyle, the chiefs require increased revenue from their northern estates. The chiefs instruct their estate factors to collect rent exclusively in silver currency. The tenant farmers living in the rocky glens cultivate small patches of oats and bare barley. They lack access to commercial markets and struggle to generate the required silver coins. The estate factors measure the agricultural yield of the glens using parchment maps and metal surveying chains. They calculate the exact financial profits generated by the tenant farmers. The factors compare these numbers to the commercial value of raw wool in the British textile industry. The British textile mills utilize newly constructed looms to weave massive quantities of cloth, creating a high demand for raw sheep's fleece. The estate factors determine that introducing massive flocks of sheep into the Highland glens will multiply the financial income of the estates. They draft physical plans to remove the human population and clear the land for livestock. In the year 1792 AD, lowland sheep farmers drive large flocks of Cheviot sheep across the Highland boundary line. The Cheviot sheep feature thick, heavy white fleece and possess the physical endurance to survive the freezing winter temperatures on the Grampian Mountains. This specific year enters the historical record in the Goidelic language as Bliadna nan Cerach. This phrase translates directly into English as the Year of the Sheep. The estate managers working for the clan chiefs prioritize the introduction of these sheep to increase the collection of silver coins from their land holdings. The estate managers distribute written eviction notices to the tenant farmers occupying the inland glens. Legal sheriffs ride horses into the settlements to deliver these paper documents, known legally in the Scottish courts as summons of removing. The ink on the paper instructs the Highland families to pack their physical belongings and vacate their ancestral agricultural plots by specific dates in the spring. In the northern region of Sutherland, a factor named Patrick Seller orchestrates the physical removal of thousands of tenants from the estates of the Countess of Sutherland. In the spring of 1814 AD, Seller rides a horse into the valley of Strathmaver. He travels alongside a group of hired men holding heavy iron crowbars and burning wooden torches. The hired men use the iron crowbars to pry the wooden roof timbers directly off the stone walls of the tenant houses. They press the burning torches into the dried heather and straw thatch of the roofs. The fire burns the wooden support beams, collapsing the roofs inward onto the dirt floors and filling the valley with thick wood smoke. This specific physical action prevents the displaced families from returning to the stone structures during the winter months. Seller replaces the human population of the valley with flocks of Cheviot sheep grazing on the newly cleared pastures. The estate managers relocate the displaced clansmen to narrow strips of coastal land bordering the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. These small plots of land measure less than 3 acres each, providing insufficient soil to grow enough oats to feed a single family. The landlords position the crofters on the rocky coast specifically to force them to harvest kelp from the ocean water. The Highland men and women walk into the freezing tidal waters holding curved iron sickles. They cut the wet brown kelp directly from the coastal rocks during low tide. They carry the wet seaweed up the shingle beaches using woven wicker baskets strapped to their backs. They spread the kelp flat on the coastal grass to dry in the wind. After the seaweed dries, the crofters pile it into shallow trenches dug into the earth. They set the piles on fire and burn the kelp continuously for several days. The heat reduces the plant matter into a hard blue-grey slag known as soda ash. Cargo ships drop anchor off the coast, and sailors load this solid soda ash into the wooden holds of the vessels. The ships transport the cargo to industrial cities in the south. Factory workers in these cities use the chemical compounds extracted from the soda ash to manufacture glass windows and blocks of commercial soap. During the 1820s AD, the international market price of kelp drops significantly. The estate landlords stop buying the soda ash from the coastal crofters. Without this specific income, the families lack the silver coins required to pay their rent. The estate factors issue new paper eviction notices, forcing the families to leave the coastal plots and abandon their stone houses entirely. Thousands of displaced Highlanders walk south along the dirt roads to the industrial city of Glasgow. They move into multi-story stone tenement buildings constructed adjacent to the River Clyde. The men and women walk to brick textile mills, working 14-hour shifts inside the factories. They operate heavy iron power looms to weave cotton and linen cloth. The air inside the mills fills with airborne cotton dust and the loud mechanical noise of spinning metal gears. Other Highland families gather their remaining silver coins and purchase passage on wooden sailing ships, leaving the ports of Greenock and Fort William. In July of 1773 AD, a 3-masted ship named the Hector sails out of Loch Broom, carrying 189 Highland passengers. The ship travels across the Atlantic Ocean for 11 weeks. The passengers sleep below the wooden deck on narrow timber bunks. They eat daily rations of salted beef and hardtack biscuits while navigating the ocean swells. The Hector arrives on the coast of Nova Scotia in September of 1773 AD. The Scottish immigrants step off the wooden rowboats onto the shores of Pictou. They carry iron axes and broadswords directly into the dense North American forests. They cut down native spruce and fir trees to build log cabins featuring central stone hearths. They use iron shovels to pull the tree stumps from the dirt, planting seeds of oats and barley brought directly from the Scottish glens. Over the next century, hundreds of wooden ships carry Highland families to specific geographic locations around the world. Migrants settle in the Cape Fear River Valley of North Carolina, using iron tools to extract sticky pine resin from the local forests to produce turpentine. Other families board wooden clipper ships traveling to the eastern seaboard of Australia and the southern islands of New Zealand. They establish vast sheep stations in these new environments, shearing merino sheep using steel clippers. In these new global settlements, the immigrants establish regional societies to maintain their ancestral lineages. They record their specific family names in paper registry books using black ink. Women continue to spin sheep's wool into yarn, weaving the specific geometric thread sets of their family tartans on wooden looms constructed in their new homes. They play wooden bagpipes, pushing air through sheepskin bags to produce specific musical notes associated with their Highland regiments. Back in Scotland, the Highland glens stand empty of human habitation. Flocks of white sheep graze on the green grass, growing directly over the ruined foundations of the stone roundhouses. Rain washes away the black ashes of the burned roof timbers. The roots of bracken ferns and purple heather push through the dirt floors where the clan chiefs once gathered their armed hosts. The physical presence of the clans departs from the steep valleys, scattering the specific biological bloodlines of the Gaels, the Picts, and the Norse across the physical geography of the entire world.